My name is Chris Willie. I am super excited that you all have joined my session today. There's some really great sessions at this time. And I'm excited to kind of bring this information to you. I'm not I don't want to be a pretender. I have not done any kind of real rigorous research into education, like teaching and learning. But it has been an absolute passion of mine, and I've been really fed and fulfilled by thinking about teaching and learning and thinking about systems theory and some of these other kind of bigger topics that have all sorts of little things under their umbrella. Today, we're going to be covering kind of the range of things. We'll talk about systems theory, systems thinking. We're going to talk a little bit about growth mindsets, and that's going to be one of the bigger lenses that we will be taking on today. And then I want to show you a tool, a teaching tool that I've been using the last couple of semesters. Basically, I pivoted when we all pivoted back in March of 2020 to this teaching and learning digital whiteboard. And there's so much to share there that I feel like we're gonna be running into a lot of Q&A about it. But before we get to that tool, I want to walk with you through kind of this journey that I was on, and how do I use pedagogy so that the tool really can be, can flex in a way that I want it to. So let's get started here. A little bit about me. Now, this tool, I'm presenting from it now. It's Miro. You might have heard of Mural. It's very similar. They're digital whiteboard spaces. Jamboards are probably similar to the same folks who do Figma, which is an online design platform, created Miro. They were essentially the same entity for a while. And I use it for literally everything, as you're going to see. So I'll present from it today. I like to start with my why. And, I'm here on this big blue zoo to help people share their stories visually. I find that, and I'm pulling this from Amy Ellis Nutt, that stories move the walls that need to be moved. And they're the way that cultures speak to one another. They're the way that generations speak to one another. And in my experience, the being able to help people share their stories allows them to be fulfilled in a way that, it's gratifying on a two-way street. Bless you. So I'm a senior lecturer over at the Peck School of the Arts in the first year program. I'm an area head of a newer area concentration called Creative Technologies. And then I'm the founding director of the Immersive Media Lab. This is a space that brings together individuals from all over campus into one room, and together we start to consider the implications and utility of these emerging creative technologies. Things like artificial intelligence and extended realities, blockchains, you name it. All those buzzy kind of techie words that you've probably been hearing about, these are the things that we're focusing on in the Immersive Media Lab. So you can connect with me on all of these places. If you're interested, I'll share this link out when we're all done so you can have this whole board. I think in the SharePoint, I've put a PDF of this whole board. So if you want to quick go there and download it and zoom ahead, you may. But you're seeing here in this Miro, one of the benefits is I can put lots of data kind of quickly, and some of the information that I kind of take with me. I've got my little library of all these books that I are kind of fulfilling the knowledge that I'm going to be talking about. So I don't know, on some level, I'm not making this stuff up. I have been reading about it, and I'm pulling out all this research from other places. So the first thing that I want to do when it comes to this talk, it's going to feel a little bit like a Prezi at the beginning, is that I like to pull in Dr. Ursula Franklin. She's a metallurgist and a physicist out of Canada, and gave this delightful Massey lecture series, which is a very important, prestigious lecture series up there in Canada on the CBC. And it was turned into a book called The Real World of Technology, and most of the things that I link to, you can actually just go right to the book if you want to here. But she said if there was ever a growth process, if ever there was a holistic process, a process that cannot be divided into rigid, predetermined steps, it is education. Think about that for just a second. If there was ever a process that cannot be divided into rigid, predetermined steps, it is education. That single moment flew in the face of my entire education career. And it also opened me up to this idea of maybe there is something else. Maybe there is something that's not based in this perfect to the T rubric where every little thing is perfectly, parsed out. And it basically gave me permission to take risks. And I want to start this whole talk with this idea that it's okay to take these risks. And it made me start to think about things in a different way. And so I went on that journey, showed you some of those books that I've read. And I came to this metaphor, this idea of think of your classrooms as a garden. Think of your students as the plants, and you are the gardener. I love this idea, this kind of way to walk into this thinking about teaching and learning like you think about preparing a garden. I don't know if any of you are gardeners. I'll be honest with you. It was when I got to a point in my life where I was no longer working 3 jobs at 4 different schools, and it's a bit of a privilege to have the time to garden. But what I tended to do is throw on a pair of headphones, listen to an audiobook, and get my hands dirty. And that simultaneous practice of me helping something grow and me growing at the same time, it just was super enriching. But there's something about gardening that I think is, I don't know, it's really visceral. It's slow, it's sedate, but every time you turn around after putting so much energy in, you get to see these things, if you're doing it right, thriving. And if they're not thriving, you can go in and intervene. And so this metaphor of, the classrooms are the garden and the students are the plants and you're the teacher, it allowed me to see things differently. And Robert Shaw, echoing Thomas S. Kuhn, said, you don't see something until you have the right metaphor to perceive it. And so I've got these 2 big primers, right? That education is a growth process. It's holistic and it shouldn't be predetermined steps. And I've got this other metaphor of growth and gardening. And these are all kind of swirling around in our head as we get into the next bigger steps here. So I started thinking about systems thinking because I was interested in going back and reading some books. And the truth is, I wasn't a great student in high school. And in college, I did exactly what I needed to get by. And I say that amongst my peers, teachers and friends and colleagues. And I think that this, I totally could have been different, right? I take that on the chin. But I think the system was also at fault too. And I found this way of okay, well, I need to change something. I want to change something. So how can I do it if there's no model to go on? Or if the models that are there are still in this kind of ethnographic approach of, okay, I'm going to assess you after you've grown. All right, these are all your products, and I'm going to make sure everything's great. And if you don't do it just the way I want you to, then I'm going to not assess you properly. And I just was like, there's got to be something else. So slow, sedate, I started thinking about gardens. And I found these, I'm going to pop into these real fast here. One of the benefits of Miro is that you can just play a YouTube link right in it. You don't have to leave. I'm just going to throw this on to a little bit faster. And we'll just enjoy the magic that is growth here. Let's play that again here. I clicked away. That's what happened. So this is this delightful little thing. We all know what's going to happen, but the sheer complexity of that moment where it pushes through, I think that's so silly that I'm almost being poetic about it, but think about it. It's going from the the safe space, and it's pushing out into this potential unknown thing, and it keeps building these structures to self-sustain. I don't know. I think that's really, it's magical. And I think that there's something slow and holistic about that magic that we forget about as teachers. Obviously, the metaphor is swirling in your head. This is our students. They have to build a base. They have to, reach out and then push through outside of that thing that's safe for them into something that's unknown. And I will be poetic about this. I'm coming from an art background. I'm not going to apologize about finding things, shout pointing at things that are absolutely beautiful. Gifts can just get dropped in here. The thing is, our students don't grow alone, right? They grow in these spaces. The original keynote speaker was talking about setting a context. And I take a holistic approach where the context is this thing that supports them, this thing that we can put time into to make sure that they can grow together. So gardens are systems, right? Where plants grow. And let's get into systems thinking here. I pulled a definition from Harvard. System thinking and teaching and learning, though. Specifically, thinking about teaching and learning through this lens of systems thinking. Systems thinking itself is this analytical process where you're focusing on the relationships between the constituent parts within a system. And there are other parts of systems thinking, but this is the one thing that I think helps us walk into what this really hyper-complex, multi-discipline, kind of emerging, shifting theory is that, in a nutshell, regardless of if you're a nursing student or if you're a business, a nursing professor, a nursing business professor, whatever, wherever you're coming from, you can appropriate this idea of thinking about the constituent parts in the system that you can control and thinking about how you can influence their ability to grow, right? So I, again, was walking through that metaphor of the garden, and this is how I came to that quick kind of 3-sentence metaphor, but gardens are classrooms, soils where the systems grow, context is where our systems grow, gardeners are the teachers, the plants are like the students, the yield is like the results of our class. But I started to really think about this, because this is super complex, that there's this nutrient exchange from at first the soil and then the soil and the environment into the plant. And I started thinking about, okay, well, what's the corollary to that? And I came to the idea that there was this information exchange that had to happen. The keynote speaker called it transfer, right? There needs to be this moment of transfer to the students. So I started focusing on this idea of transfer, but it didn't really have a thing to it, where each of these other parts, the soil's a thing, the classroom's a thing, the gardener's a thing, the teacher's a thing. This idea of a nutrient exchange is a process rather than a thing. So I started thinking about process in general. And in the world of systems thinking, energy is a really important thing to look at in your systems. You have your matter, you have your energy. And in systems thinking, I'm pulling from all sorts of places. I'm pulling from economists, I'm pulling from physicists, I'm pulling from social scientists. And by pulling, I mean I'm reading books from these different people and trying to figure out through the lens of systems thinking what's the corollary, right? And so when I talk about energy, I'm not talking about this hippy-dippy kind of feel-good thing. Though I think that there's something to that. I'm not going to lie. I think that there is something really important about the kind of physical manifestation, or not physical, metaphysical manifestation of energy you put in the room. But the truth is that's not what I'm talking about with this. I'm talking about the kind of definition of energy that physicists use. I'm pulling from the big picture from Dr. Sean Carroll here, but free energy can be used to do what physicists call work, right? If you take some macroscopic object and move it around, we are doing work to it. So the definition of work is simply the force we exert to get a thing going, times the distance over which it's moved. So essentially, it's like thinking about the kind of energy you would need to get a rocket into space, or to gently lift your eyebrows to indicate skepticism, or I will extend this, the kind of energy it takes to have a thought. That was an important moment for me to start thinking about, well, what's actually going on in our students' minds? What's the energy look like? And there are, trillions of neurons that happen in the brain, so there's really no way that my brain can even understand or apprehend this concept. But I found some GIFs that I think are interesting for us. So I'm just going to pop this in here. I'm going to make this full screen and loop it so we could just see this for a second. So the left is an animation of an fMRI of the brain actively moving. And then we have the kind of amplified version of that on the right. And I originally came to this GIF with the one on the right. Somebody had shared it on some social media platform. I was like, really? Our brains move around that much? At least I dug in and didn't just share this one. But think about this, though. That there's so much. Our students are sitting there. They're not giving us anything necessarily. And these days, I see a black box, so I don't even know if they're sitting there. But there's so much activity happening between their ears. There's so much energy that is doing work that I just never really thought about. I never took that as an avenue to dissect, to push. And I've got a link to that research so you can see how that was made. And I started focusing on the energy it takes for our students to grow, and started thinking about what does that look like. And I've got just another GIF of one single neuron amongst trillions that are growing. There's energy that's happening that we are stimulating with our words, with our actions, with our environment, with what we choose to put in the user experience. We're responsible for this. And I know it seems so granular, so literally atomized almost atomized to think about it on this level, but holistically speaking, we need to focus on their energy. At least that's what I started to do, and it's really fed me. So I want to take a second here. I'm going to pull up the chat. We're 3 or 4 bobbles in. And I'm just curious what your initial thoughts are on the idea of thinking about energy and this metaphor, or using any metaphor to walk into a teaching and learning process. I'm curious if you're skeptical. I'm curious if you are interested. I'm curious if you're thinking this is a bunch of malarkey. I'm just curious what your initial read is at this moment. And we'll just get a feel. I've got my chat running. So thank you for your feedback. I appreciate that. I should look into that JS Mills. Thank you. Oh, lovely. I also relate, the idea of metaphors of growth to relationships as well. If there are other questions or comments, throw them in there, and then Ben can update them. But Cold. I need to know more about cold, Ben. Thank you all. Thank you. So I'm not coming from left field as the general consensus I'm getting here. Nobody's feeling totally lost, like I'm not sure about all of this. The reason I feel it's important to kind of stop and check in, obviously, is it's an interruption. It helps us kind of make sure we're on the same page. But I'm going to say this, and it's usually used in a pejorative. I feel ignorant a lot of the time of what other contexts are for teaching and learning, and how people are talking about systems thinking, because there's this like kind of gap between what I've officially gotten for my education and where I've gone and given myself my own learning. And so there's this kind of moment where I want to make sure that this isn't landing weird, and it's landing in a way that you understand and that you're feeling good about. Because when I first started talking about it, I felt a little cuckoo for coconuts of like, this connects with this and this connects. And I just got super excited, and now I think we're getting to a point where we're all on the same page. All right, so brief, we're talking about this metaphor. We're thinking about systems as places that we can cultivate where systems grow. So we've got systems upon systems, a little turducken going on here. And I started thinking about the relationship in terms of energy between the systems that we create and the systems that are in it. And so we've seen plants grow in soil, and now we've seen the energy it takes for our brains to actually have a brand new thought. Funny enough, your brains are doing that right now. So I started thinking about that energy, right? And coming back to the Miro, teachers plan the course. That takes energy. Teachers prepare the space, either the classroom or the actual user experience. That takes a boatload of energy. There's an information exchange, an experience exchange, and that is like this energetic process. And then students come to the system wanting to grow. They do want to grow. I mean, they've paid money to have you help them grow. And then there's systems of assessment, which also take energy, a different kind of reflection energy. But assessment and reflection are critical to understanding that we have come forward. In fact, I just did it. Just a small moment. Hey, are we on the same page? Let's reflect. Let's assess. Okay, we're good. Let's keep going. So energy flows are important in system thinking. Dr. Jeffrey West, he's the individual who founded the Santa Fe Institute, a complexity theory think tank. Wrote a book with an admittedly super long title, but I'm just going to tell you a story. I was on a jog, and Dr. West was talking about energy. Said audiobook, right? Energy is primary, and we realize everything we do and everything that happens around us, continually having to supply energy for growth, for innovation, for maintenance, and for repair. And I literally remember stopping mid-stride and writing those words down: growth, innovation, maintenance, and repair. Because at the time I was thinking about how energy can be used in the classroom, and I realized that I've never been guiding that energy. And that's what I started to use as this kind of overarching structure to guide my students' energy. My thinking here was self-sustaining systems, plants, they have to use energy to grow. All right? Well, plants are self-sustaining, but in that, as long as their system is good, they can continue to grow on their own. But our students, there's kind of this inequality with the energy. I'm putting so much energy in, and sometimes I feel like there's hardly any energy going out, and I don't feel like the system that I've created gives them time to actually like grow, complicate, and then like make sure, right? And so that's the next step of this thing that I'm trying to introduce today, is this idea of guiding that energy. It takes a little risk, right? But it's putting that structure out there where you're literally changing your curriculum, changing the class kind of mode, so that the first mode is about establishing information. I'll zoom in here. And I'm going to kind of rip through this just for time's sake. So we're introducing the domain. We're guiding preliminary experiences, demonstrating workflows, and then contextualizing and signifying the relevance of the context. That is one section of growth. Think of that, if you will, as the roots, complicating and going under the structure, right? That's where they're actually establishing their knowledge in whatever content that you're guiding them towards. The next step, and literally it's almost lockstep, there's some exercises and things like that you can do between these two, but the very next thing, and this uses Constructivist Pedagogy and some of those theories, but you're scaffolding, right? You take that, what you've established, and now you grow right on top of it. You're not establishing a brand new bunch of content, you're growing and complicating what you've just established. So you're building on that prior information. You're expanding their domain. You're challenging those prior experiences, complicating your demonstrations of techniques or concepts or workflows or routines, whatever it is. And then you're offering ways to contextualize the nuances of that context, so that it's not just information for information's sake, but you're actually situated in the world, of whatever your world would be. That would be the second step in this process. The third step, and this was big for me, it required me to change everything. So this does involve risk. But I added a third day where I gave them an option. They could choose to repair or maintain. And so I'm going to go into the repair first because this is brand new for me. And it's this idea that comes directly from Dr. West that organisms that are self-sustaining need to spend energy repairing their structure. Well, I've never done that. I expect the students to do it outside of class. But by putting it in the classroom, I'm emphasizing its importance. I'm giving them time and energy, or time to spend energy on repairing their relationship to the information, content, workflow that was part of this unit. And then recovering knowledge as needed. If they need to just go back and reread something, or go back and retry something, but they know that they need to repair it because they only kind of have it, or they don't have it at all. I think that's really important. They have the choice though. Let's say they're fine. They've got the content. Now they need to maintain it. Before we start doing something else, how do we strengthen? How do we make sure that everything in that system, in that unit, has enough strength to be resilient? And that's where deliberate practice, which is an important concept in teaching and learning, where students are going back and doing exercises just to reify, to make sure that they got it. And if they've got it, they don't need to deliberately practice, then they can take on an intrinsically motivated challenge. And this is also tricky. How do you create intrinsically motivated challenges in a system where there's lots of predetermined rubrics and lots of predetermined steps? That's challenging. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But it's also important to allow your students, I think, to have the agency to choose what challenge they want to take on. Because if they're just taking on a challenge for you, then they're performing for you. But we don't, at the end of the day, when they leave our classroom, we don't want them performing for us, right? We want them performing for themselves. We want them to be confident and self-assured. So this maintain day is huge. I started doing this, I want to say right around the beginning of COVID. So once we started going online, that spring semester we got back, I took my course calendar, and this is, again, one of those things from Miro. I have a link to it. It sounds like somebody else in here is using Miro. We can sing Miro's praises. Miro, doesn't really matter. I don't really care. It's a tool, right? And this is an approach to use this tool. But there's a template. These are things that you can pre-download that gives you the course calendar. I added in, the course begins, but this is how I set up my course calendar. And this is one of those takeaways that I'm interested in sharing with you. This idea that each unit has with it 3 distinct parts. And somebody said earlier, you need to be overt about telling them this. Y'all are absolutely right. My students know exactly that this is the process that they're going through, that this holistic process where they are establishing information in a unit, where they're complicating that information in the unit, and they have time to take on exercises and more exercises, and then finally they have time to maintain, deliberately practice, or repair their relationship to the information from those prior two classes. This is a Monday, Wednesday lab that happens, as you can see. And before we go on to the next thing, there's this moment of reflection where then we establish, and again, it's constructivist, right? So we just maintained and repaired a whole bunch of information. Now I'm going to draw a whole bunch of links from that last unit to this next unit so that we're continuing like rings on a tree. There's that growth metaphor again, to grow. And this is one of those things that I would say is a bit of a takeaway from this class. And it's before the semester starts, so you have the ability to actually think about this. And you could try it. It's full of risk because it's going to require you to change some of your calendar, or change the way you're thinking about your calendar anyway. So, plan classes to guide their energy, to dedicate class time to establishing the content, business, nursing, you name it, to grow the complexities of that content in another session, and then to give them time and you the ability to kind of cultivate and maintain as well, and help them repair and maintain the relationship to the content. So I want to show you some after, and then I see that we're getting close to time, so I want to open some time up for some Q&A. I want to talk a little bit about how the after is cultivated, though. I talk a lot about growth mindsets, or growth in general, and I've seen TED Talks that are about grit, and they refer to Dr. Carol Dweck's research about growth mindset, and I finally took the time to actually read the full research, read the paper, and I got to tell you, it was awesome. If there was one book out of here that I really think you should take away, it's this mindset book. They have it both on audiobook and regular PDFs, but there are just so many game-changing pedagogical shifts that happened while I read this book. I think it's incredibly important for teachers who are taking on this idea of growth mindset to think about actually changing their language, changing their practice to reflect a growth mindset culture. When people change to a growth mindset, they change from a judge and be judged framework to a learn and help learn framework. That's what I want to see in the real world, people, right? I want that to happen no matter what the content in my classroom is. Let's learn and help others learn. Their commitment is to growth, and growth takes plenty of time, effort, and mutual support. So I started measuring my students' growth, and I started setting up whole systems so that students could see their growth and other students could see other students' growth. And the whole thing is creating this kind of self-sustaining cultural residue where everybody who walks into my space gets this messy craziness where there's a whole bunch of stuff. Somebody's coming in. Welcome. So
you are now in our touch-tone system.
Thank you for muting. This is what some of the Miro pages look like. I've got them preloaded. I'm teaching in an art design context, and so these students are learning really difficult, truly difficult technological systems, software, and then sharing their progress. And so I'm just going to pop that open right here. This is what the aftermath of what one of these classes looks like, right? So I have these little gardens, and I know that this looks like a whole bunch of seeds right now. So this is a 100-mile overview. Think of us being in an airplane above some community gardens. But the students have access to these little gardens where they're supporting each other, and they're constantly showing their growth. I am using a whole bunch of other tools, things like HyperDocs, and I'll put all the stuff in one spot and then put it on the calendar. Students can come in at any time and zoom in, and I'm going to do that right now, and they can see what we covered on a specific day, right? And so we have the recordings, we have the goals of the class, we have any exemplars, we have any class notes, all the tutorials, all the resources, what's due when. It's all right here. And if you're like, oh, drat, that wasn't the day, I needed to go to actually the 19th well, I wasn't recording that day, but I needed to start my midterm project. Ready to go. So this is the way that I've been using that calendar after. I had said in the takeaways that I was going to show you a before and after approach to Miro. So again, I'm going to share all of this with you. You can get access to it. I converted this quote a little bit, and I'm super sensitive to time. If teachers want to give their students a gift, the best thing they can do is to teach their students to love challenges, to be intrigued by mistakes, to enjoy the effort and keep learning. They will have a lifelong way to build and repair their own confidence. It's as though Dr. Dweck is aware of what Dr. West is saying, but I don't know as these two things have been connected. And so I want to take this quote and draw a direct line between systems thinking and teaching and learning, and how self-sustaining these two things are. And of course, I've asked students to tell me about it. I've been doing this for 3 semesters now, and I'll just read some of the big ones. You have access to all of these. I cherry-picked a little bit, but in general, this is 3 classes, and it's embarrassingly and overwhelmingly positive. Honestly, this was the best structure I could think of for the class. It really allowed us to practice what we were learning, as well as learn more if we wanted to. I really enjoyed the structure of the class. I think that that this allowed me to grow significantly more than any other course ever has. I had never experienced something like this. Every other classes are literally straightforward and tell us what to do, but you never told us what to do. You wanted us to discover for ourselves, which I truly enjoyed. I honestly cannot give this class enough praise for its structure. Not only was it a complete departure from the grade-based cheating fostering system most students experience throughout high school, it didn't leave me behind. It perfectly explained itself and brought me along, so I wasn't confused at all about how the structure was going to help me actually learn and retain the material from the course. Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. It's embarrassingly good. That's what I've got for you today. And I'm so excited to share it with you. But here's the thing. I know each of you are coming at this from a different perspective. My hope, my genuine hope, is that you'll take parts of this and appropriate them and then remix them for the context that works for you. Maybe not this whole system, because you have black and white answers you have to have the students find. But the idea of a holistic approach where you're guiding their energy, I think that's important. I think that's something novel, and I don't know anyone else who's thinking about it this way, so I sincerely appreciate getting the opportunity to share this with you all. And now I'd like to open it up for some feedback. I'm sensitive we've only got about 5 minutes, and I'm sorry I get excited and I talk too much, but I hope that you got something from this, and maybe we can keep talking. You can connect with me afterwards. But thank you so much. I'll open it up for questions. And if you want to turn your mics on, feel free. Oh, Carol, thank you. Well, people are getting their questions going. I will say that I've started a teaching and learning vlog, if you will, called the Idea Aggregator, where I'm going to share a whole bunch of these little tips and tricks that I'm learning throughout this journey, just because I feel like it's time to start bringing them out into the real world and having other people use them, corroborate them, and make them better is the next step, I think. All right, so Adam, what is something that you learned from your first iteration of this format to subsequent iterations? That's a great question. So I learned that instead of having it be open-ended, I decided to, this is a model, right? This is the next iteration of it. I decided to turn every single one of those throwdown spaces, the space where students are sharing, into an individual space that's connected to the unit. And then I decided to put exactly what I wanted them to learn right next to that. And lastly, I'm having them evaluate their learning rather than me having to constantly go back in and check. So this is, I call this the know, understand, can. It's a rubric, right? Make no mistakes, it's a rubric, but these are big jumps. Rather than keeping it all open, I'm now connecting it very specifically. And we'll see. I mean, this is a test, it's a risk. So I'm going to show them this like in the first couple of weeks of class, because otherwise I'll overwhelm them. But this is the structure that they will enter in. And I think, there's, like I said, there's a whole bunch of little bells and whistles here. I'm gamifying this. I've got XP now, for crying out loud. There's so much there. But Adam, I appreciate that question. And I'm continuing to develop this and grow it as well. Yeah, could you talk a bit how you connect this platform with Canvas? If you do, Carol, that's you've got a good insight here. The thing is, Canvas has a very specific structure, and it's built on like a chronological deployment, and this has to be a little bit more open-ended. So what I've done, and students have asked for this, is put specific deadlines into Canvas so that it pops up on our phones. We like that. And so that's the real way that it integrates. I use Canvas as an initial announcement, initial onboarding, or attendance, and then I put due dates in Canvas as well. But basically, I'm then trying to end around and route everything through Miro and then Discord. So we have a Discord channel that they use as well. Does this platform gather student data? Do the students have to pay for the platform? Rosemary, that's a great question. Educators get access to this free, and they can invite up to 100 people to be on their board, but you can also change the settings of each of these boards, right, so that anybody with a link can access and edit it. So students do not have to purchase anything. They can come in, they can register, and then they can just participate without buying a single thing. You're intrigued about what repair looks like in the classroom. Let's see if I can find a moment where students have repaired. I think I do have a very specific instance. So perspective is something that is difficult for certain people to kind of grasp at first. And so I have a student here, Sanyu, and if you notice, I'm keeping last names off so that FERPA is still satisfied. But Sanyu had a very, very difficult time with perspective, and some of the initial drawings were fascinating, honestly. Like I showed some of these basic skills of perspective, but her mind just wasn't getting wrapped around it. So during our maintain repair day, she said, "Hey, I need some help. Can you give me A, some resources, and B, some like one-on-one?" And of course, it's a perfect day for it. So we went in, I showed kind of like, okay, so this is your scheme, this is how this would look, notice what side is which. And then by the end of the class, this student started to be able to like get figures in perspective, which is, I think, kind of the top of that game. And the very end of the class, they were proud of how they could create perspective. And so maintain repair gave this student time to put energy into fixing something that was fundamentally not working. And typically we do that outside of class time, but this is a moment where they can do it inside the class. So thank you for that question. Are there any other questions? I see that we're 1 minute after. So again, I've put this whole entire presentation on the SharePoint. Thank you all. I'm honored to share this time with you all. Connect with me somehow. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you're using this.